Language often constructs our perception of reality. As the philosopher and writer William H. Gass once said, "The true alchemists do not change lead into gold. They change the world into words. Or so they try." Jason Silva says, "The use of language, the words you use to describe reality, can in fact engender reality, can disclose reality. Words are generative. We create and perceive our reality through language. We think reality into existence through linguistic construction in real time." Terence McKenna says, "The world is made of words, and if you know the words that the world is made of, you can make of it whatever you wish." Deepak Chopra has also said, "Language creates reality." Noam Chomsky has said, "The structure of language determines not only thought, but reality itself." Desmond Tutu has said, "Language does not just describe reality. Language creates the reality it describes." Michael Hyatt has said, "The language we use creates the reality we experience." But I think there is also a deep paradox in this. I believe that the world is not made of words fundamentally, but rather that we've made the world made of words. Hi everyone, welcome to Conscious Commentary in the rainy garden today. I'm going to do my best to get our segment in today. We've got some drizzle that actually feels quite good after all the heat that we've had, but nonetheless, let me get on with it because I have a lot to share with you, particularly with what you just heard. That was an article entitled, "Does Language Construct Reality or Our Perception of Reality?" by someone named Bryce Hemond on the blog, or of the blog, theminddomain.com. I'm going to link that article because it's actually quite revealing and quite lucid in its describing how language is more than just a sound. And that is really where I want to kick off this episode today. But before I do, I want to again remind you, if you have enjoyed, if this is not your first time here particularly, and you've seen some of our episodes of both Higher Journeys and Conscious Commentary, I would urge you to consider subscribing on the link below. Okay, here we go. I want to talk to you about something that happened to me last Saturday. If you tuned into my Conscious Commentary live that I did last Friday, which I am coming to absolutely adore. I love meeting with all the journeyers and talking about life and really about our own story. In that particular live stream, we talked about this idea of people during the pandemic having a rash of strange and vivid dreams. I brought that up really within the context of, well, really a metaphysical context, of course, but really getting into the fact that dreams we're carrying over a lot of what we're bringing to the table, or how we're living our lives, nothing new, into the dreamscape. And so there have been record amounts of people that have reported what they're actually calling COVID dreams or pandemic dreams. And there are a number of other words. When you Google strange dreams and nothing else, it'll come up automatically. Nonetheless, that was one of the things that I talked about in a larger context, of course, on Conscious Commentary Live. In addition to, in the course of going through a whole litany of things, how cases of depression and mental stress have gone up exponentially, no surprise. Okay, well, that's not the point. The point of the matter is, after I named that, after I specifically spoke about those two elements or features that seem to be indicative of this incredibly unusual world that we're living in, guys, the very next day, two things happened to me. I want to be, as always, frank and honest with you. I'm not here to just talk about what's good to do and how to fix this and how to do that. I hope you know that. I also want to share with you my own story because, like I say, we all have skin in the game, including me. I am a human being who is subject to a lot of the, in some cases, pitfalls and emotional discord that others, of course, are. And in this case, it was no exception. On Saturday, the day after Conscious Commentary Live, I went out for an errand. I went to a grocery store. I'm not going to name the grocery store, a large chain here in Massachusetts. Went to the grocery store. That particular store, of course, I visit frequently for years and know the manager quite well. She's from Brazil. I love her dearly. She's so so warm and always has a kind word to say. Well, we saw each other on this particular day, the day after Conscious Commentary Live, and I think it was the first time I had seen her masked. And I have to tell you guys, I may have said this before to you, that I'm still having a difficult time with the reality, like I'm sure many of you are, with this idea that we can't see each other's smiles anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. There's so many inhibitors, I think, in this new reality, but I'm not going to get into that, and I'm certainly not going to get into the politicizing of it. But nonetheless, I was sad. And we had a few words that we exchanged. How are you? I'm hanging in. How are you? I love you. You know, just a nice little fellowship. And I looked at her and I said, I'll call her Mary, not her real name. I said, Mary, can I hug you? And she looked at me and her eyes welled up with tears. She said, yeah. And we embraced. We were both masked, okay, but we embraced. This is one of the elements, one of the many bizarre elements of this entire, I'm calling it the backdrop that's right in the forefront, the backdrop of our lives, that I have had the most difficult time with. The fact that hugs heal. Please forgive that motorcycle. A lot of people are taking out their frustrations on their motorcycle. Forgive that sound. Hugs heal. Smiles heal. Touch heals. And I'm not going to be shy about saying that. I think we know that. And this is the one thing that we have been asked to withdraw from. And that has been perhaps the most difficult part of this entire story for me since its inception. The very thing that I feel is integral in healing the human being from all sorts of maladies we've been asked to withdraw. So I said to Mary, may I hug you? She says, absolutely yes. Well, I don't want to digress too much. That's my point in that. But journeyers, I got in the car after I left that store and I lost it. I literally boo-hooed. I wailed because I think everything just sort of reached this emotional crescendo for me, and I could do nothing but really melt down. Now, I've hugged, over the course of a few months. I'm not going out hugging everybody. I love to hug, by the way. I love it. It's healing. But I have been somewhat judicious about who I hug, but I have hugged a couple of my dear friends who I hadn't seen for a while. I'm sure you have too. But in this particular case and in this particular venue, I think it had really just come to a boiling point for me. And I got in my car and I remember putting my sunglasses on because I didn't want anyone to think I was having a meltdown in my car. I mean, the tears were just pouring out of my eyes. I later went home that evening and really sat in a space of solitude for quite some time and really kind of thought about the enormity of what we're being asked to do. And again, from a purely emotional, from a visceral perspective, and knowing how important the human touch is, kind of going through that whole process of what happened earlier in the day, I had a meltdown. I'm going to call it a spiritual emergency. I wouldn't say I had a nervous breakdown, no. But again, going back to what I had brought up the day before on Conscious Commentary, the live stream, and talking about mental health going up. I think the number was 1,000% in terms of people calling a variety of mental health hotlines. I believe this was a Kaiser poll, and there have been others. No surprise that mental instability has gone up exponentially for obvious reasons. Well, I got to tell you something. Yours truly was one who I can say, I'm going to call it a spiritual emergency. That word has a lot of connotations, and I'm sure you've heard it before. Oftentimes, spiritual emergencies will be more akin to a peak experience or a transformational experience in which we are going through a Kundalini awakening, where something is welling up from deep inside of us, and we're literally metamorphosizing into more of a spiritual being than our human counterpart. And all sorts of even deleterious things, ugly things, can happen during a classic spiritual emergency. But I choose to call what happened to me on that Saturday, a week ago tomorrow, last Saturday, as a spiritual emergency, because there's a spiritual component to what brought me to that place of reaching a tipping point, reaching a boiling point where I didn't lose my temper. I literally just cried. I've cried before in looking at the prospect of having to stay away from each other, or at least many are opting to do that for God knows how long, and what will be the ramifications from a broader perspective of human touch and healing if that is sustained. Now, so that's what happened there. I call it a meltdown. The next day I was okay. That's another story for another time, on how it actually was a sort of purging that was very cleansing. But I want to get to yet another aspect that I brought up. We got some loud crows here. They're going through a little bit of a mental meltdown as well. I guess it's par for the course in the garden. That same day, obviously I had a very emotional end to the day. I went to bed. Now, before I even say this, I want to bring up one of the other things that I brought up in the live stream if you were there. And if not, you can still go back and certainly watch it in its entirety so you can get an even greater context as to what I'm talking about now. I talked about, well, I think we brought up strange dreams, particularly COVID dreams, pandemic dreams. I did bring that up just a few minutes ago, trying to keep track of everything. Guys, I went to bed that night and guess what? I had my very first COVID dream. Very first. I brought it up the day before, just like with the mental meltdown stuff and the COVID dream. And I had one. I'm not going to get into the details. It wasn't horrible, but it was clearly directly linked to the environment and what we're going through today. It had nothing to do with the hugging thing, but it was a COVID dream, a pandemic dream, of which has been talked about so incredibly frequently. So, two things happened to me, two of the very things that I spoke about the day before during the live stream. So the question becomes, do the words that I speak in some way have an influence? I'm not going to say completely create, but have an influence on the reality that I would experience less than 24 hours later. That's why I wanted you to hear that open when we talk about, it was Deepak Chopra and that little clip that said language creates reality. Someone else said we both create and perceive our reality through language. In 1 John in the Bible, this just came to me, and obviously many people who know the Bible know this. It says, this is 1 John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The word, language, is so much more than sound. It's vibration. How serendipitous that just this past Wednesday, I had a fantastic conversation with sound scientist, I call him, Stephen Halpern, well-known New Age composer. And one of the variety of things that we talked about, we're having a conversation about immune boosting sound, certain sounds, and how they can be both helpful and hindering. And in the course of that conversation, what we talked about is how our environment, including the words that we speak, the emotions that we emit, can be, and certainly will be, depending on the strength of the word, the repetition of the word, and the feeling that we're having, literally be encoded in our energy field, in our aura, if you will. And I believe in our conversation, we were speaking in the context of why it's important to, let's say you are creating music or even art for that matter, but let's say for the sake of keeping it with sound, if you're a musician, and he has some science to show that musicians who were in a recording studio at the time of being in a very unstable state, depressed, on drugs or alcohol, whatever, somehow they were able to see how the mood or the disposition of the musician would affect the outcome of the music. Maybe in some cases they were well aware of it and did it on purpose. We know of musicians who were on LSD trips and perhaps created some of the most intriguing and awe-inspiring and even, sometimes discordant music, but powerful nonetheless. So I think it's fairly well known that words, language, and emotion, if spoken repetitively and with conviction, can be encoded in our energy field, in our environment, and thus create, or at least add to creating, to the reality that we may in fact see play out. Now, in the case of my discussing these two elements, among others, I mean, this Conscious Commentary Live last week was not just about strange dreams and not just about mental health. It was, again, in a much larger metaphysical context, as always with the conversations that we have. But the fact that I had to study that, I had to get some stats on it, and then broadcasted that live, could that have somehow been encoded at some level in my energy field and my environment, thus my having two distinct experiences that mirrored identically what I was talking about the day before? It's a thought. I don't know that we can prove that, but again, I had never had a COVID dream, but I had been studying it. I had been looking at headlines, looking at all the memes that have kind of cropped up over the last several months about people having strange and vivid dreams directly related to COVID. And here we are, and here I am. I woke up the next morning and I thought, oh my God, I just had my very first and hopefully my very last dream as that was described. I'm going to stop repeating that word, by the way. Sonia Choquette, who I have not talked to in years, I've had her on the show a couple of times. I'll never forget, she has said, maybe, I don't know that she's coined this or not, but it's so apropos, when you name it, you claim it. When you name it, you claim it. And so our words, again, are so much more than sound. They are vibration. Again, going back to what Stephen Halpern talked about when I asked him a question very fundamentally, how is it and why is it that sound can heal or hurt? What is it? And we have an idea of what that is, but I wanted the audience to hear how he explained it, and he did was so articulate in his explanation. Quite simply, sound is vibration. It's more than just emitting something that's audible to someone else and bounces off of them. It's literally being permeated by the environment or the person that's listening. And of course, there are a number of factors, repetition being a very, very strong factor in if the words that we're speaking. Of course, this can work for either negative, deleterious, I like to say, or positive ways. And we certainly need to be embracing the positive in all of this. But the vibration, and us as being electrical beings, which I'm going to get into a little bit later on in this episode, makes for a template. We are part of this frequency, and we are adding to that frequency as we speak, as we emote. And the stronger the emotion, I've always maintained, the more of an effect, whether bad or good, it's going to have in your immediate environment, including with yourself. There's a book that I have long referred to. It's I would consider this a primer for those that are interested in understanding the basics of psychology and metaphysics. And it's called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. I can't even remember when this book was written, probably back in the 70s by Joseph Murphy. A small book. It's so funny, I was looking all over the place for it. I think I have 2 copies, couldn't find one of them, but I was able to procure some quotes from the book. That book has always had an effect on me, guys, because it really lays a framework for how the subconscious mind, as part of our system. Now, obviously, we're talking about psychology, but how the subconscious, both unconscious, subconscious, and conscious minds are like sponges. They absorb whatever is spoken, felt, whatever the case may be, and record it almost like a disc. And that book, even though I think it's written more within somewhat of a quasi-religious framework, it has some very interesting and very good explanations as to how and why the subconscious, as he says, can't take a joke. And I want to read something from that book. Again, many, many years ago, probably one of the first books that I got my hands on as a primer in the field of metaphysics and psychology. But I want to read something from that book where he's talking about the power of suggestion. He says, the dictionary says that a suggestion is the act or instance of putting something into one's mind, the mental process by which the thought or idea suggested is entertained, accepted, or put into effect. Or spoken, I will add. He gives an example that I will never, ever, ever forget, and I have talked about this many times over the years. This is allegedly a true story that was told to him by a Dr. Evelyn Fleet, a director of an organization who had learned about an article which appeared in the English newspapers. I'm going to read this to you, dealing with the power of suggestion. And I'm reading verbatim. It says, this is the suggestion a man gave. This is a particular case of a man who gave a subconscious or a suggestion to his subconscious mind over a period of about 2 years. He would say, I would give my right arm to see my daughter cured. I would give my right arm to see my daughter cured. I'll never forget this story when I read it years ago. Apparently his daughter had a crippling form of arthritis together with a so-called incurable form of skin disease, and medical treatment had failed to alleviate the condition. And the father had an intense longing for his daughter's healing, no surprise, and expressed his desire in the words just quoted. So he would say, I would give my right arm to have my daughter healed. Well, Dr. Evelyn Fleet said that the newspaper article pointed out that one day the family was out riding in their car when it collided with another. And you might be able to guess what happened. The father's right arm was torn off at the shoulder. And when it was, his daughter's condition immediately vanished, both the arthritis and the skin condition. So he says, you must make certain to give your subconscious only suggestions which heal, bless, elevate, and inspire you in all your ways. Remember, as I said before, your subconscious mind cannot take a joke. That was always powerful to me. And from the moment I read that little anecdote, true or not, this is an article that appeared at some point somewhere. I think, did they say in England? Not sure. From that moment on, when I originally read that, probably back in the 70s, whenever this book was written, I thought, I am always going to mind my words. Think of the words that we say, even casually, but they become habitual. I know someone that would often say, when someone's making them laugh, you're killing me. And I would say, stop saying that. And I would go into explaining from the best perspective that I knew how. But again, we become so habitual in these memes that we use, not realizing the power inherent in those words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Word is power. And so even in a very relatively casual way, and really just in reporting to you last week on the live stream, some of the findings that I had discovered perhaps triggered and initiated what I would invariably experience the next day. I think I got my point across. So many of you that are listening know what I'm talking about. I'm not telling you anything new. There's nothing new under the sun, even though I can't see it right now. Nothing. But sometimes we need a bit of reminding. Even things like, just as an example before we leave the subject, let's say something happens. This is something that I would find myself doing. Let's say something happens that is hard to fathom. And I'd go, or even in a good way. Let's just say it's something really good. And you're sitting there, I would sit there and go, unbelievable, unbelievable. And I would stop myself and say, Alexis, don't say unbelievable. Switch it and say believable. Even things like that. Because guess what? If that, what would you call that? An expression. If that's repeated enough, particularly if the thing that is unbelievable to you is something that you're so excited about and that you want, but you're saying unbelievable, subconscious may be saying, okay, you want unbelievable, I'll give you unbelievable. Not real anymore. And the opportunity or whatever it is will go away. I take it very seriously, very seriously. And I had a little reminder, I think, last week. Now, I'm going to go, this is connected, and yet it's somewhat in another direction. What I'm really kind of putting out for you all today is this idea that what we emit in terms of whether the words are spoken, emotions that are felt, electrical pulses that we are emitting into the environment, we have an effect on our environment. And it could very well be that we, both collectively and individually, are creating our environment and our circumstances by the very fact, but by the very way in which we operate as biological and electrical beings. And that will lead me to this. There have been a ton of storms lately. Now, I haven't been able to comb the headlines a lot in terms of tumultuous weather. I mean, look, we've been dealing with crazy weather for reasons that have been hotly debated. Let's just say we'll stay away from that conversation today for a long time. We're dealing with atypical weather patterns. But I have taken notice, once again, just being sort of tethered to looking at patterns, at least here and then looking up subsequently in other parts of the world, an enormous amount of thunderstorms, electrical storms, and tumultuous weather with rain and hail in some cases, in many cases. So I decided to get a few headlines. I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up and how it came up. The other day, we had probably what I would call one of the worst, one of the most powerful thunder and lightning storms that I have heard in a long, long time. And I thought to myself, my God, just violent. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it make sense that we're dealing with a tumultuous time emotionally, collectively? Could our collective attitudes, our collective behavior, our emotional state be having an effect on the weather? I've always felt that man has an influence on the weather. Again, there's another part to that conversation I'm going to leave alone right now. You know what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, even from a purely organic perspective, the Native Americans would do rain dances, etc. And we know there's science to show that we can have an influence on the weather. Well, with everything that's going on right now and all the angst and tension and stress and sadness, wouldn't it make sense that our weather is mirroring that? Again, we talked about this on Conscious Commentary in the Garden before. Nature is more than a metaphor. It is a mirror. It has to mirror back to us what we're feeling. So I decided to do a little bit of research on headlines from around the world about, is this a pattern that's happening? I know it's been happening here in New England with very, very violent and frequent electrical lightning storms, cloud to ground lightning, etc. And so I got a couple that I want to read to you. This is from the Watchers News that came out in early June that said, listen to this, nearly 87,000 lightning strikes detected during a once-in-a-decade storm in Washington State in the United States. That's what meteorologists are calling this, once-in-a-decade storm. This was in, I think, about the first or second week of June. Here's another one from the Washington Post that says, and this was in late June, world record lightning mega flash in South America. Get this, 440 miles long, confirmed by scientists. And then earlier this week on our news here in New England, and I remember I got this verbatim in the sort of weather factoids, it was reported that on this particular day, it may have been Tuesday-ish, Wednesday, that powerful thunderstorms, and this is the report, powerful thunderstorms and torrential downpours would be occurring every minute of that day somewhere in New England. Powerful thunderstorms with cloud to ground lightning and torrential downpours would be occurring every minute on that particular day. I can go back and find out, but nonetheless, over the period of 24 hours, every minute during the day somewhere in New England. When I put all that together, and there have been other headlines, I don't want to bore you with it, I just want to make the point that apparently the electrical generation in storms and the fact that thunderstorms have been so ubiquitous may in fact be a direct result of the fact that this is, as electrical beings, we are maybe contributing to the energy that's being generated by these storms. I'm not a meteorologist, I don't know how it works, but coming from this perspective, it would make perfect sense. So I thought I would get a quote or a little statement that I think might substantiate that, at least to some extent. Here comes the rain. I'm gonna try to wind this up at about 29 minutes. from the number one best-selling book, The Body Electric by Dr. Robert O. Becker, written in 1996, still number one bestseller. And I remember this book. I think I have it. But let me just quickly read a quote to you. It says from this book, both electric and magnetic fields are really just abstractions that scientists have made up to try to understand electricity's and magnetism's action at a distance. Think Einstein's spooky action at a distance. Produced by no known intervening material or energy, a phenomenon that used to be considered impossible until it became undeniable. A field is represented by lines of force, another abstraction, to indicate its direction and shape. Both kinds of fields decline with distance, but their influence, and this is important, their influence is technically infinite. Every time you use your toaster, the fields around it perturb charged particles in farthest galaxies ever so slightly. I had to read that a few times because it's relatively technical. But I think what Dr. Becker is saying here is what science has shown is that spooky action at a distance occurs. We, as electrical beings that are emitting thousands upon thousands of I'm just going to call them dots of electrical pulses. There's another word that's not coming to mind right now. That are going where? They don't dissipate. They go into the environment. And it doesn't matter, even though the effects, as he's saying here, may diminish as distance may be a factor, or maybe not. But the bottom line is that energy is going somewhere that we're emitting, emotionally emitting so much. As electrical beings, are we contributing to the barrage of electrical storms that have been happening all over this planet with record-breaking, what was this headline? 440-mile long lightning mega flash? Have you ever heard of such a thing? I'm going to see if I can find an image or two of that. That's amazing. So this is where I'm going here. Again, is our own collective emotional state coupled with our body electric contributing to this consistency? Bottom line is whether it's words that we're speaking, emotions that we're feeling, couple that with our being electrical beings, powerful, energetic beings, we are creating the world that we are experiencing to a great extent. I always say we have skin in the game. I am going to wrap this up because now it is raining. I guess my emotional state is perturbing the environment and the rains are coming now. So be careful. I think the message is, please, let's be aware and be careful about the words we speak and how we're feeling, particularly now. I feel that it's a metaphysically potent time. We may be getting the things that we're feeling and speaking boomeranging right back to us. So let's be careful and know that it can work in the opposite way. Let's continue to think positive. There's always something good to be thinking about. Let's do that. All right, very quickly, next episode. So excited. Next Wednesday on our regular Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks, I'm going to be interviewing the producer of The Real Exorcist. Don't know if you've heard about this film. Quickly, it's a supernatural film from a Japanese producer, and it's filmed in Japan. And it dramatizes the effect of negative energies and illuminates the power of a positive mindset. That's what this is all about. I saw the trailer and I'm about to see the screener over the weekend, and it looks pretty doggone good. So this is a subtitled movie. And at first I thought, is that going to be a deal breaker for me in having this gentleman on to promote this movie? But even from the trailer, I can see this is action-packed and the message is pretty powerful. So I decided when I heard from his publicist, yes, let's bring him on. So we're going to be speaking on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we've got Conscious Commentary Live. And you better believe me, guys, journeyers, I'll be careful what I say. All done in the spirit of information, inspiration, and empowerment. That's why I'm doing these for you. So I know subconscious can't take a joke, but can you kind of take it easy on me, really? Okay, listen, I'm going to go. It's raining, bad hair day, who cares? I love you guys. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks and Conscious Commentary Live.